Alfonso Cahero, A Journey into Finance History. Chapter 27, French Revolution and its Economic Causes, 1789. The French Revolution of 1789 was not solely a spontaneous uprising, but rather the culmination of decades, if not centuries, of simmering discontent rooted in economic injustices. At its heart lay a stark contrast between the privileged elite, composed of the nobility and clergy, and the vast majority of the populace, consisting of peasants, artisans, and urban workers. The economic disparities were stark. The aristocracy lived in opulence, enjoying vast estates, luxury, and exemption from many taxes. Meanwhile, the common folk labored under heavy taxation, feudal dues, and economic oppression. The nobility and clergy wielded immense political power, further entrenching their economic advantages. The economic injustices fostered a profound sense of resentment among the lower classes. Peasants toiled on the land they did not own, paying taxes to support the extravagant lifestyles of the nobility. Artisans struggled to make ends meet, burdened by restrictive guild regulations and monopolies. Urban workers faced low wages, long hours, and precarious employment. As economic conditions deteriorated in the years leading up to the revolution, so too did social unrest. The economic grievances of the common people merged with broader discontent over political corruption, social inequality, and the perceived tyranny of the monarchy. This fusion of economic and social discontent ignited the powder keg of revolution, setting France on a course towards profound and irreversible change. The French monarchy faced a dire financial crisis in the years preceding the revolution, exacerbated by decades of extravagant spending, costly wars, and inefficient taxation. The royal treasury was depleted, and the government teetered on the brink of bankruptcy. The financial strain was aggravated by the refusal of the nobility and clergy to contribute their fair share of taxes. The privileged classes enjoyed numerous exemptions and privileges, shielding them from the fiscal burdens borne by the common people. Attempts to reform the tax system and impose levies on the nobility met with staunch resistance, further deepening the financial crisis. To finance its mounting debts, the monarchy resorted to borrowing heavily, plunging France into a cycle of debt and deficit spending. Loans from foreign creditors, including Britain and the Dutch Republic, only exacerbated the nation's financial woes. By the late 1780s, the French government was effectively insolvent, unable to meet its financial obligations or cover its expenditures. The looming specter of state bankruptcy cast a pall over the monarchy, sowing panic and uncertainty among the populace. The financial crisis underscored the inherent weaknesses of the ancien régime and laid bare the need for fundamental reform. It also provided fertile ground for revolutionary agitation, as grievances over economic mismanagement merged with broader calls for political and social change. One of the most glaring injustices of the ancien régime was the inequitable system of taxation that burdened the common people while sparing the privileged elite. The tax burden fell disproportionately on the lower classes, who were subjected to a myriad of levies and duties that drained their meager resources. The taille, a direct tax on land, was one of the most oppressive impositions, imposing heavy obligations on peasant farmers to support the extravagant lifestyles of the nobility. Additionally, indirect taxes such as the gabelle, which levied a duty on salt, and the octroi, which taxed goods entering cities, further burdened the poor and hindered economic activity. The tax system was not only inequitable, but also inefficient and riddled with corruption. Tax collectors, often appointed from among the nobility, exploited their positions for personal gain, extorting bribes and embezzling funds at the expense of the taxpayer. This widespread corruption further eroded public trust in the government and fueled popular discontent. Economic distress was compounded by rising prices, food shortages, and inflation, which exacerbated the hardships faced by the lower classes. The cost of living soared, while wages stagnated, leaving many struggling to afford the basic necessities of life. As economic conditions deteriorated, so too did social tensions, setting the stage for revolutionary upheaval. The French countryside was gripped by an agrarian crisis in the years preceding the revolution, characterized by poor harvests, food shortages, and rising prices. Peasants, who constituted the backbone of the rural economy, bore the brunt of the crisis, facing hunger, poverty, and deprivation. The feudal system, with its archaic land tenure arrangements and oppressive obligations to landlords, exacerbated the plight of the peasantry. Peasants toiled on land they did not own, paying taxes, rents, and feudal dues to their noble overlords. The seigneurial system imposed onerous obligations on peasants, including the corvée, a compulsory labor service, and the banalités, fees for the use of the lord's mill, oven, and winepress. The agrarian crisis fueled rural unrest as peasants protested against high rents, feudal dues, and oppressive labor obligations. Peasant revolts erupted across the countryside as disaffected villagers rose up against their feudal masters in a desperate bid for economic and social justice. The rural unrest spread like wildfire, fueled by grievances over economic exploitation, social inequality, and political oppression. Peasant insurgents seized control of manor houses, burned tax records, and demanded the abolition of feudal privileges. The agrarian crisis transformed into a full-blown revolutionary upheaval as the peasantry joined forces with urban radicals to overthrow the ancien régime and usher in a new era of social and economic equality. The economic grievances of the lower classes were not only fueled by material deprivation, but also by a growing awareness of Enlightenment ideals and revolutionary fervor. Intellectual ferment swept across France in the decades preceding the Revolution as philosophers, writers, and pamphleteers challenged traditional notions of authority, hierarchy, and privilege. Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu espoused radical ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity that resonated with the aspirations of the oppressed masses. Their writings critiqued the injustices of the ancien régime, championed the rights of man, and called for sweeping political and social reform. The spread of Enlightenment ideas was facilitated by the proliferation of print culture, which democratized access to knowledge and empowered ordinary citizens to engage in political discourse. Pamphlets, newspapers, and books disseminated revolutionary ideas to a wide audience, igniting a fervor for change and inspiring the masses to take action against tyranny and oppression. The revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity galvanized a diverse coalition of reformers, radicals, and revolutionaries who sought to overthrow the ancien régime and establish a new social order based on principles of justice and equality. The fusion of intellectual ferment and revolutionary fervor provided the ideological foundation for the French Revolution and fueled the fires of rebellion that would engulf the nation in upheaval. The convening of the Estates General in 1789 marked a pivotal moment in French history, as representatives from the clergy, nobility, and commoners gathered to address the nation's pressing economic and political challenges. However, the convocation of the Estates General also unleashed a wave of political turmoil and social unrest that would ultimately culminate in revolution. The Estates General had not been convened since 1614, and its revival raised hopes for meaningful reform and redress of grievances. However, tensions quickly emerged between the three estates over issues of representation, voting procedures, and the allocation of power. The commoners, or Third Estate, demanded a greater voice in decision-making and challenged the privileges of the clergy and nobility. The deadlock between the estates sparked a constitutional crisis that pushed France to the brink of revolution. Faced with resistance from the nobility and clergy, the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly and asserted its authority to represent the will of the people. This bold assertion of popular sovereignty set the stage for a showdown between the forces of reform and reaction. The events of the Estates General underscored the deep divisions within French society and the growing momentum of revolutionary sentiment. The refusal of the nobility and clergy to compromise or yield to popular demands only fueled the flames of discontent and radicalized public opinion. The stage was set for a confrontation that would alter the course of French history and shake the foundations of the ancien régime to its core. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, marked the symbolic beginning of the French Revolution, and signaled the triumph of popular uprising over royal authority. The Bastille, a fortress and prison in Paris, had come to symbolize the tyranny and oppression of the ancien régime, and its fall represented a decisive victory for the forces of revolution.